My name is Ziyang David Fan. I am the head of digital trade at the World Economic Forum. I'm based in San Francisco, California.
Ziyang, it's great to see you virtually, even though we're only a mile apart here in San Francisco. We know each other from the World Economic Forum, where Denmark has been a supporter over the last couple of years, and you are of course one of the senior members of the team in San Francisco, heading up the work around digital trade. But we also know each other from UC Berkeley, where you teach a great course on tech policy, and we've been happy to contribute some of our hard-won lessons learned and experiences from time to time. I would love to start out by asking you, when you sit here in San Francisco at the World Economic Forum, what are some of the key trends that you see emerging from the corona crisis?
Thank you, Deputy Tech Ambassador. It's always good to see you, and thanks for inviting me to speak on this issue. To answer your question, I think in the past couple weeks and month, if you drag it all the way to when this crisis first started, we have seen three issues in the area of digital trade. One is supply chain. The breakdown of a supply chain is a real issue. As we all know, since COVID-19 crisis started, it started in Asia, then a ripple effect across the world. The supply chain visibility has always been an issue, but it has never been so serious as it is now. As a lot of people know, trade is a very it's still very physical document driven. As in, for example, Maersk is a huge Danish company and one of the largest shipping companies in the world. And colleagues there will also tell you that in many places, you still need to actually deliver a physical document, for example, bill slating, to move the goods along. So digitization of the supply chain, digitization of trade has been a topic for many years. So this is not new, but things sort of worked before. However, now during the COVID crisis, sort of work doesn't work anymore. So the digitization of supply chain is a necessity, and we have seen that countries and companies and organizations who have a stronger digital infrastructure in the trade and supply chain system have been doing better than those that have a weaker digital infrastructure. So I think to digitizing the supply chain, providing more visibility of both upstream and downstream suppliers to create a system to encourage the sharing of data while protecting privacy. Could be using new technologies such as blockchain to provide that type of security and provide incentive for suppliers to share data up and down the supply chain. I think we will see more of that happening. So that's number one, is the digitization of supply chain. Number two is an increase, a significant increase in digital trade in services. So that's something I've been talking about for a while now. And again, this is not new. So teleconferencing, remote work, distant learning, telemedicine, those things existed already. However, with the COVID-19 crisis, it's a huge acceleration. As we know, everyone is using Zoom now. I think that's a perfect example. If you have kids, your kids now, before, there are a lot of reasons why online education or distant learning is difficult to carry out, but now, boom, you're forced to do that. So I think with that, we will see more of the adoption of the especially when it comes to cross-border, falls under trading services. So if you don't have, if you're in country X and you need to see a doctor in another region or in another country because you don't have enough doctors in your country or region, that is also digital trading services. Of course, that brings some issues around, for example, data flows to taxation. How do you collect the taxation and licensing issues? So is a doctor across the screen that you're talking to is actually qualified and he's a real doctor, right? So I think those are some issues we need to think about. And the third piece falls under digital trading services as well, but I'd like to separate out, is one e-commerce, and that particularly related is on digital payment. So e-commerce and digital payment, again, is not new, but this COVID crisis made it very real for us, because with the restrictions on physical movement, consumers and folks would have to rely heavily on online shopping and e-commerce. For example, in China, actually in late 2002 and early 2003 with the SARS situation, that actually laid the groundwork for China's e-commerce to take off, as well as China's e-payment system. For example, companies like Alipay got a huge boost during that time period. So with the, when you talk about e-commerce, of course, you need e-payment as the enabling function, right, to provide the payment. Also, cash may carry virus. So that is a real concern. And there are reports that there are banks actually physically trying to claim the cash. So I think this is another added incentive to push for digital payment. Not just any digital payment. Contactless digital payment is now the preferred effort. I just read a report that I think MasterCard and Visa has just increased the limit so that certain amount, so I believe it was under $250 US, the consumers don't have to sign. You know, when you go to the supermarket, you have to sign on the pad. You don't have to do that anymore, because that's another way to reduce potential infection channels. So just to recap, in the digital trade space, we have seen a lot of challenges, but also a lot of creative solutions. So I think in the digitization of the supply chain, increase in digital trading services, and the further adoption of digital payment are three of the many trends that we will see happening.
You mentioned telecommunication, you also mentioned fintech. Is it fair to say that some sectors or some businesses will be better equipped to weather the storm we're in right now? And which sectors or businesses do you think will do very well during this crisis? And what sectors do you think will struggle?
That's a really good question. I think, as I mentioned, I think the sectors that are more digitized definitely are more in better shape. Two, I'll say SMEs. So it's not a blanket statement, but in certain areas, I think small and medium enterprises are better suited to weather the storm. This is actually coming from, we hosted impact of COVID-19 and on trade and economy, the China Business Roundtable, virtual roundtable, of course, a couple of weeks ago, hosted by the World Economic Forum. And one of the panelists shared data. So his company actually covers tens of thousands of SMEs in China. And what he has witnessed is that for non-essential services, such as like fashion, the demand has dropped significantly. But for essential services, for example, face masks, PPEs, the demand obviously have gone up. SMEs are more nimble, they're more agile. So they are in better position to shift, pivot to fulfill the current needs. So, and the graph he showed was that there was a dip, of course, but then it bounced up really quickly. So I think that might be applicable for the rest of the world as well. Smaller enterprises, whether they're in Europe or they're in the US, might be in a better position to respond to this crisis in a more agile way.
Ziyang, we are at a time where the international rules-based system and organizations are under a lot of pressure, not only from the COVID-19 crisis, from many different sides. You deal a lot with trade, in particular digital trade. How do we ensure that we maintain the free, fair, and sustainable trade at a time where everything is under pressure?
That's another great question. I think the WTO Director General just did this video, I guess, announcement, and basically stating that the trade volume will be affected. Just depends to what degree this year because of the COVID-19 crisis. So that is something we are all facing. But at the same time, I think he also point out, which is a point I very much agree, is that this crisis showed how interconnected we all are globally. So we really, and there are some worrying trends that countries are. So export restrictions is an issue that we have seen, especially around medical supplies, and recently some countries also applied it to agriculture goods. So that's I think that's a trend, but hopefully that's only temporary, because we really do need an interconnected system, especially to effectively fight this crisis. But at the same time, we see some positive trend. There are also countries that are liberalizing more trade rules around the trading services. For example, one country liberalized rules on teleconferencing. So exactly what we're doing right now. So I think that is, and hopefully that will also continue, as I just mentioned before, the digital trading services, especially from education to healthcare. And there's this area we all need to focus on and enable that to be more effective. For example, of data flows with trust and security and privacy concerns. That will be a good way to move forward.
Ziyang, are you experiencing a growing number of governments, sending emails to you, contacting you to try and learn more about how you digitalize trade flows, how you improve the way you work on digital trade?
Yeah, so glad you asked. So earlier this week, we organized a virtual meeting on digital payment. So it's a virtual meeting, and we had over 60 participants, and many of them are from the governments, especially from the central banks. So I think that is very, as mentioned before, the digital payment is an issue that many countries and governments are thinking about at the current time. However, there are many challenges. For example, how do you do? Well, if you cannot go to a bank, if you cannot submit certain documents, how do you conduct KYC, know your customer procedures? So eKYC, again, has been floated around, but how do you actually, that sounds like a great technical solution, but how do you actually implement it? And that governments would need both timely, but also sensible policies to make that reality. Interoperability is another issue that we're facing in digital payment, and also the last mile. Financial inclusion is a huge goal for many of the governments even before this crisis. But now, with the if you have digital payment, it will be obviously easier for e-commerce, for online shopping, but also for many countries are now issuing stimulus checks or social support checks. That payment, if you can receive directly, if you have a bank account or a digital way of receiving that payment, that is a lot better than, say, receiving a physical check. Then you have to go to the bank, you have to deposit, you have to wait for the bank to open and all that. So I think financial inclusion is not the way folks are thinking. So I think that's just an example, I think, for the governments to deal with the some of the export restriction issues, and in the digital space, how to I think that's something folks have realized, both in government and private sector, is that the more digitized you are, the better you are typically at faring to deal with this crisis. So, however, ICT infrastructure, basic ICT infrastructure is an issue that just cannot be solved like this. So I think this is also a wake up call for many of the the governments that the digital transformation and the fourth industrial revolution again, it cannot be just put on the back burner forever. It's something that affects all of us and can literally save lives and livelihoods at this moment.
Yeah. On that note, Ziyang, I want to ask, as the COVID-19 crisis propels fourth industrial revolution further into our lives, into our homes, into our work lives, into the way we interact, do you worry that that will happen on the expense of some of the necessary safeguards or policy or regulations to make sure that we don't undermine the values that we have?
Yeah, so here at the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution in San Francisco, really focused on co-designing the human-centered approach of technology governance with the public and the private sector. And that we have been doing that for several years now. And that, I think, in this COVID-19 crisis, it is even more important to focus on tech governance. We have seen a lot of tech deployment recently, new technologies to help fight this crisis, which is super, super important. But at the same time, tech governance issues also surfaced. For example, there were some privacy concerns with one of the teleconferencing companies. 3D printing is another good example. There was a really heartwarming news. So I have a project on 3D printing and trade. There was a heartwarming news coming from Italy. I'm sure you have heard that there's some very smart folks that used 3D printing, a 3D printer to print the valves for the ventilator when there was a shortage of that, and suppliers couldn't get the valves to the hospital on time. So the 3D printed that. So that is a great story. But at the same time, I read reports that there were some IP issues to print that valve, and maybe some liability issues. So I think that's just another example. EKYC, we talked about this. How do we do that in a manner that protects your both safe but also protects your privacy? So I think the tech governance issues, privacy, of course, when there's some apps that will track you, on the one hand provides more accurate data, but on the hand your privacy concerns. So I think all those technology governance concerns should not be put aside just because we're facing this crisis. If anything, we should incorporate that human-centered approach in our solution for this crisis. But that's the only way to ensure that the solutions are sustainable. It's not just a knee-jerk reaction or band-aid that could fall or invite more backlash later on. I think that's the right way to approach as well.
If you for a moment take off your World Economic Forum hat and put on your professor hat, you teach tech policy at UC Berkeley. We've talked at length several times about these perceived gaps that exist between regulators and technologists, and between good legislation and the way that it works and functions today. Do you think COVID-19 will lead to better tech policy in the future, or do you think it will undermine the way regulation tries to work in the technology field?
So this is speaking as my professor had at Berkeley. I think in the short term, that might be. I think in the short term, the focus will a lot be on the results, right? Because that cannot be delayed. Like every day, every hour can save lives. So I think a lot of attention will be focused on the result. And I won't say that the policy governance, tech policy issues are not there, but maybe the focus will be a bit more on the actual results at the moment. But I think as we have all seen those issues, people have been surfacing those issues. If anything, I feel this crisis is a good time, is an excellent time to examine that. Because if everyone can, pay pay attention or even lip service to certain issues that we all want to protect privacy, right? When everything is hunky-dory is great, but it's really in those in the challenging time that really reflects whether an organization, whether a government, whether a company, where their values lie, whether they can stand up to what they kept saying, what they say they stand for on certain issues. So I think this is I do think that even if we see the situation focus on a bit more results now, which is not all the case. There are still many cases that folks focus on governance issues. But I do think that this is actually a good time to really focus on ethics and human-centered approach on tech policy. And in the medium and long run, you will come out on the upside.
Mm-hmm. Great. And Ziyang, just to finish on an optimistic or a slightly positive note, I think one of the most quoted sayings right now are never waste a good crisis. So if you were to sort of pull out the silver line, everything right now, do you think something positive will come out in the longer run from the global crisis we're in right now? What would that be?
So I read a joke on LinkedIn the other day. The question is, who led the digital transformation at your organization? Answer number 1, CEO, no, X. Answer number 2, CTO, no. Answer number 3, COO, no. Answer number 4, COVID. Answer yes. So it was a check. So it's a joke, but I think there's some truth to that. I think the need for digital transformation has been highlighted very much so in this crisis. It's not a nice to have, it's a must to have. As I mentioned, it's not just sort of work doesn't work anymore in this situation. So I think the need for digitalization, digital transformation coming up to the 4th Industrial Revolution, those needs are hard needs, not just soft needs anymore. So I do hope that after this crisis that will come out on the positive side as more organizations and companies and governments adopt more digitalization, while of course keeping human-centered tech policy governance in mind. I really do hope that's the positive outcome.
Ziyang, my friend, thank you for finishing on a positive note. Pleasure talking to you as always.
Oh, thank you so much, Deputy Ambassador. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.